Good evening. Welcome to our Representative Town Meeting informational meeting for 2025. We had caucuses at 5:45. It's great to see so many people there, and this meeting is scheduled to start at 7, so we are starting right now. My name is Daniel Quip. I'm the chair of the Brattleboro Selectboard. To my right, to your left, I don't know. Elizabeth McLaughlin, vice chair, Peter Case, Franz Reichsman, Richard Davis has been our clerk this year. To my left, town manager John Potter and town attorney Bob Fisher. Over there, assistant town manager Patrick Moreland running microphones around. And we have many town staff scattered around the periphery, maybe ready to answer some questions later on if we can't. And I think it's really important to recognize that this is a time for questions, for information, also a time for humility. I will not know the answer to every single question that's asked. It's possible that even the hive mind here will not know those answers. And if we don't know those answers, we will write down your question and we will work on it. And there's plenty of time between now and town meeting. So, that being said, I have a number of little bits of business to attend to here. The first thing I'm going to do is talk about expectations for this meeting. And usually in a select board meeting, I have a whole spiel that I go through. But I was in one of the classrooms, I think it's Anne Moore Odell's classroom. And on the board, it said expectations. And I just want to read them because I actually think that they pertain to us as well. So, first one is one person talks at a time. That's helpful for decorum and also being able to hear each other. Secondly, raise your hand before speaking. And I would say raise your hand and wait to be recognized. School appropriate language, please. Which includes, being kind to each other. Stay on topic and task. Ask for help when you need it. I will. I hope you will as well. Treat people the way they want to be treated, and ask before leaving, bathroom included. That one doesn't apply. You're all grown-ups, and you can do what you want to do. But I would say, if you do leave, try to leave quietly. So can I get a thumbs up that you're willing to kind of go along with those expectations? Nice. Very good. All right, gold stars all around. Okay, the next thing is some announcements. So the Unified School District will be holding their annual meeting on March 18th at 7 p.m. in the BUHS gym. So that's next Tuesday, which would have been our select board meeting, but we moved it because we're nice. And so you can go to that meeting. That is where they vote on the budget and do all of their other annual business. The regularly scheduled select board meeting is being moved to March 20th, which is a Thursday, so that's next Thursday at 6:15 p.m. All the materials and agenda will be warned by this Friday afternoon. The purpose of this informational meeting is to provide information for representative town meeting, and it's not a time for debate or advocacy. And I had asked a couple of people, where's the line? And somebody said, "Does it end in a question mark?" I think that's a good point, right? So if what you have to say is kind of more ending in a period, maybe it wasn't really a question. Well, it definitely wasn't. Robert's Rules. There is a tutorial that was recorded by Andy Davis a few years back, deep in the COVID times. And it can be found on the town's website. You just go to the representative town meeting section, and there's actually a whole subsection for training and information. And so it's not only that video, which is helpful, but there are also other pieces that I found today that I think are worth your investigation. RTM itself, this is kind of important, will be held on Saturday, March 22nd, and will start on time at 8:30 a.m. in the BUHS gym. So all elected members obviously should show up, and members of the public are invited as well. Order forms for lunch must be turned in by the 21st of March to the group indicated on the order form. It's a little vague. There's a school group that puts together lunch, and you can buy lunch from them, and it goes towards fundraising for trip or something. Yeah, I'm seeing general nods. Oh, nice. And there are forms here. See, this is ask for help, right? In our books, there's a form. So it's the BUHS Queer Straight Alliance lunch pre-order form. Looks like this. Dependent care stipends are available through the town manager's office. So if in order to attend representative town meeting, you need somebody to provide dependent care, that can be reimbursed. The forms are available through the town manager's office.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This lunch form says you're to email the order form to rdavidson@wsesdvt.org by Friday, March 21st. Where would one find this form electronically?
That's a great question.
We can put it on the website and with a little.
And there's your answer.
John's going to put it on the website with a little something. I saw a bunch of hands as well. That's scaring me already. We can't have so many questions for this part. Yes?
I believe there's already a link on your website.
There is already a link on our website. Oh, nice job. Whoever did that, thank you. Okay, and then furthermore, Jess? Do you want to come to the microphone? So that we'll have the static microphone and a roving microphone so that other members can hear you, and also like this is recorded, and if somebody wanted to hear your question afterwards, you know, that's how they'll
Thank you
do it.
for providing the option for dependent care, because I think that creates an accessibility for wider demographic in Brattleboro. And my question is there a deadline for submitting the form for reimbursement?
Great
Because we
question.
have to do that after. Reimbursement sounds like after the fact, right?
Okay, John? After is fine. Deadline for stipend requests. Ooh, where did you get this from? In the book as well? Wow, I should have read it. Friday, March 28th at 5 p.m. Friday, March 28th at 5 p.m. So like, you know, within the week after. Great. Spoon. Wow. This is going to be a long one.
Correct
No,
me if
that's not about spoon. That's just about the number of hands at this point.
my recollection is when people picked up their lunch, they had to eat them at their seats. And I was wondering, I would like to say, I mean, this is last minute planning, but perhaps the select board could ask the school if it could make its cafeteria available so people could sit with each other at tables.
We will ask. I make no promises about the answer. Bonnie.
This is a ridiculous question, but
Great.
I have to hire somebody to take care of my dog. Is that dependent care covered?
As far as I'm concerned, yes.
Thank you.
But, you know. Okay. Can we move on? So the next thing I want to talk about, as Liz has already demonstrated on a couple of occasions, is the importance of this book. If you don't have one sitting in front of you already, there are copies over there at the back with our esteemed town clerk. It contains all of the information that you'll need for town meeting. And also within that book, you should get the 2025 Representative Town Meeting Finance Committee report. And I want to congratulate that committee on a job well done. Thank you so much. All right, nice. Very good. Okay, so we did expectations, we did announcements. How this evening will work, he says, as if having ever done it once before. So my understanding of having participated in these and kind of watched last year's as a reminder is that really this is a time for us to go through what is on the warning for representative town meeting, right? We've done those announcements and whatnot, and now what I'm going to do is just basically walk us through article by article what's on the warning, and I'll make time for each one for you to ask questions. We'll keep the questions to the article itself that we're talking about, and we will ask questions rather than make, you know, statements of advocacy or what have you. And, you know, some of them are really easy and some are much more complicated. So we'll see how we do. And so unless any of my colleagues have anything they want to say, I think we'll get right to it. And like, this is a meeting that the chair does a lot in, but it's not the chair's meeting, it's the select board's meeting. So like, anyone who's sitting down here should feel free to chime in at any time. And to do that, you might need to kind of nudge a little bit because I can only see so well. Okay, so I'm opening my book to page 15. Please follow along. All right, so page 15 is the warning. It says at the top that the legal voters qualified to vote in representative town meeting are hereby notified and warned to meet in the gymnasium of the Brattleboro Union High School on Saturday, March 22nd, 2025 at 8:30 a.m. to act on the articles listed below. Articles that have not been acted upon by 5 p.m. will be moved to March 23rd, 2025 at 8:30 a.m. unless the body votes to continue past 5 p.m. Questions on that? Okay. All right. Article 1 says, to see if the town will ratify, approve, and confirm the Select Board's appointment of a town clerk for the term of 1 year. Hillary Francis is our town clerk. Everyone loves her. She's doing a great job. And keep that positivity going, hopefully. So this article is to see if we will, confirm her appointment. Questions about that? All right, great, moving on. Article 2, to see if the town will ratify, approve, and confirm the Select Board's appointment of an interim town treasurer for a term of up to 1 year. And that person is Leslie Smith, the assistant treasurer. Questions about that? Okay. Article 3, to see if the town will ratify, approve, and confirm the Select Board's appointment of a town attorney for a term of 1 year. Bob Fisher, this gentleman here is our town attorney. It's actually his firm, really, that we employ, because it's not only Bob that does that. Questions about that?
Christina Shayanya, District 8. How
yeah,
many?
thanks for doing that. I guess I didn't say, if people, when they get to the microphone, could then introduce themselves.
Okay. Oh, there it is. What was my question? How many towns is Bob Fisher the town attorney for?
Okay. Town Attorney Fisher, you're interrogated.
That depends on the year. There are some, I would say we do work for upwards of 12 towns, but some towns may have like one item per year in very small towns. Like, for instance, the town of Woodford has one item we've worked on all year. But of the Brattleboro is the major town that we represent.
Thanks, Bob. Any more questions? Okay, seeing none. Article 4 is to act on the town auditor's report. Questions about that? The auditor's report is in the back of this booklet, and I just magically turned to the exact right page, 157. So it's really this, almost like the second half of the book. We did have a question about the audit that led to it being an agenda item on the select board meeting, maybe in the last month. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on. Article 5, to see if the town will authorize its select board to employ a certified public accountant or public accountants. Questions about that? Gemma? Could you wait for the microphone?
Sure.
Patrick down the front.
Hi, Gemma Seymour, District 8.
Hi, Gemma.
Do we not have an accountant?
Good question. John?
We do have an accountant on staff. I believe, Patrick, is this for the audit?
You're good.
Sorry about
You're good.
that. Yes, this is for the purpose of an outside auditor to having our books reviewed and considered by somebody who wasn't involved in the preparation of those books.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Other questions? Okay, moving on. Article 6, to see if the town will authorize its select board to borrow money in anticipation of taxes, grants, and other revenue. As I understand it, this is kind of boilerplate stuff. We just simply need the authority to borrow money. Questions about that? Okay, moving on. Article 7, oh crikey, now we're getting into the long ones. I might not do so well reading these. So this is an article that is about raising and appropriating the sum of $131,698.86 through special assessments, which is another way of saying taxes, on property within the Mountain Home Park Special Benefit Assessment Tax District, so Mountain Home Park. There's an explanation of this article on page 18 of this book that explains kind of the history, and my very brief summary would be that the town many years ago helped the park finance some utility improvements by getting a loan, by being the agent to get the loan. And this is an article that allows the park to pay us back a certain amount of money each year. It's pretty boilerplate. Questions? It's Marta, I think.
Marta Gossage, District 9. Every year this is on the ballot. Is there a mechanism by which we could approve it for a certain number of years, or unless there are changes to be made to that agreement, instead of having it every year? Because, I mean, this is money we have to raise, and it's explained every year. So I'm wondering if there's, maybe this is...
Sounds like a great town attorney question.
Right.
Yeah.
Bob?
I would love to say yes to that, but the answer is no. Because it is a special assessment, it needs to be voted upon every year. And I would love to find a way to make that truncated, but this acts essentially as creating a special assessment on the Mountain Home Park properties, such that if they don't pay the debt service on the loan, this acts as the security for it. And because in our charter we have to have special assessments, and it's also by statute, those have to be done each year. So sorry about that, but I don't see a way around it.
Thanks, Bob. It's a usually pretty easy piece of business. Do you want to have a follow-up?
Yeah, just quick follow-up, because I know there's some new folks. What would happen if we ever rejected this?
If you rejected it, there is an agreement between the town and Tri-Park, and essentially of our debt service, that is the town's debt, Tri-Park pays for that yearly debt. If you rejected this, then you would not have collateral such that then if Tri-Park didn't pay the debt, that debt would need to be paid by other funds of the town of Brattleboro. The whole idea here is this debt is being paid by the Tri-Park owners. So if you didn't do that, potentially there would be a kind of a two default system, but if there were a default by Tri-Park, that debt service would need to be made up by the town.
Thanks, Bob. Other questions? Okay, moving on to Article 8. So this is about raising and appropriating the sum of $80,000 through special assessments, again, taxes, on properties within the Downtown Improvement District, as delineated, yada, 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 to be used for capital and operating costs of projects of the town's duly designated downtown organization, which is the Downtown Brattleboro Alliance. This is another annual thing that is done, allowing for this assessment to be raised. Questions about that? Arthur?
I do have a question about this, Arthur Davis, District 8. There's a map in the
Oh yeah, page 19.
that shows the delineation of it, yeah. And it's mostly commercial properties. There are a few properties on there that I'm pretty sure are just like residential properties, and it always has seemed like a little funny to me, and just wondering if there's an explanation for that.
An explanation for what?
The fact that there are like seemingly single-family homes in the special in the special downtown improvement district.
Great. I'm looking at Sue Fillion, our planning director, and thinking that she might have something to say about it that is more informed than I.
So when the downtown district was designated, it was done with the programs required in alignment with the state's requirements, which was really to get a concentration of the commercial and civic buildings. And I'm trying to think off the top of my head, can't think of any single-family homes. I can look into that and get back to you. They might look like single-family homes, but they might be nonprofits or other businesses that are in there. But we can get back to you on that.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, so I guess we'll add that to our list. And last year, I noticed in the materials that there was, a document that was created that collated all of the questions from, this session and then provided answers. So you'll have that in time for the meeting. Other questions on this special assessment in the downtown district? Yeah, Abby, and then Spoon.
Abby Manukin, District 8. I think it was a couple years ago that some amount of money was specifically directed towards a marketing campaign. Love Brattleboro, I think. And I'm just curious if marketing in particular is part of this item, or if it's separate, or if they don't actually have to report on what the money's being used for.
So this is to be used for capital and operating costs of projects of the organization. I couldn't speak to whether this currently, I don't believe currently there's even a marketing campaign happening. We'd need to, hi Kate. That's great. Do you want to go ahead and answer it?
I'll try to answer. Kate O'Connor, District 9. I am on the Brattleboro Area Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors, and it was the Chamber of Commerce and the DBA that had the Love Brattleboro Marketing Initiative. And in the past, we received $35,000 from the town. That marketing initiative is no longer happening, so you don't have to worry about the $80,000 going to that campaign.
Thank you. Spoon?
May I return to the auditor's
Would you
report for a moment?
introduce yourself?
Is what?
Would you introduce
Spoon
yourself?
Agave, District 8. May I
Will you
return to
return
the
to the
auditor's
auditor's
report
report?
for a point?
Not really.
Well, I just wanted to say, I know that very few people will read the auditor's report. You need some good financial education to be able to read that report. There's a lot of stuff that's very relevant to town finances, like debt to equity ratios and stuff. You got to know a lot about it. On page 217 and 218.
Spoon, if you could keep it brief, I'm being generous by going backwards.
By going backwards?
Yes, we've already kind of dealt with this one, but.
Is what?
If you could just keep it brief.
Oh, okay. So I think I can about stop there. 217 and 18 is one place in which the auditors actually talked about their findings and what they meant and a few things. So if you're willing and you can, skim through the narrative part of the report and see what you can understand. But that's where you'll find something anyway. That's
Okay.
understandable.
Mr. Agave is encouraging you to read the auditor's report and focusing on those pages. And was it a question? I don't know. Did it end in a question mark? Not quite. We'll move on back to where we were before, which is Article 8 about the downtown assessment. Sonia? Could you just wait for the microphone, please? It's an accessibility question.
It's so quick. Just on page 109, there's a report from DBA.
Thank you. Page 109, there's a report from DBA. See, we do this together. Everyone has read certain parts of the book and helps each other out. Okay, very good. Other questions about the DID assessment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Oh, Jennifer,
The
would you
assessment.
introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, I'm Jennifer Burnell, Town Assessor. The assessment, the tax is assessed on just commercial. I do remove any residential that are in the downtown. There are a few, but they're removed for the
That's great.
assessment.
How about that? Question asked, question answered. Very good. Thank you, Jennifer. Are we ready to move on to Article 9? Okay. Article 9. It's complicated. to see if the town will appropriate up to $851,836 from the unassigned fund balance to defray emergency expenditures associated with the Downtown Safety Action Plan. That came to $675,669, and the increased cost in solid waste services in FY25. So that's the budget year that we're in right now, which came to $176,167. And on page 20, you'll see an explanation of what that all means. It's pretty complicated. I wonder if our town attorney could just give a sort of brief summary of the situation.
I think the main reason that this is brought before you is that both of these expenditures were unexpected expenditures insofar as they were not in the budget. So these expenditures go beyond what the budget called for. So in essence, there's been a bit of an overspending on that. So typically what would happen if you don't have an article to assign fund balance to cover it, essentially the audit would be done as of June 30th of this coming year. And the audit, all other things being equal, your fund balance would go down by that amount because you've essentially overspent. You haven't exhausted your cash flow because you have fund balance, and so that's obviously a good thing. But these are large numbers, and so it's important for the board to bring this to your attention because we also have the board's recommendation or guideline of keeping the fund balance roughly at 10%. So with this, and you look at the auditor's report, that 10% may be being dipped into. So if you pass this article, you're essentially ratifying the board's decision and essentially, I'm not an accountant, but in my view, balancing the books for the year. If you don't pass it, then the fund balance essentially will be reduced by that amount. And the reason we put this before the budget article is so that depending on what happens here, you can make adjustments as representatives when you get to the budget article. So there's been a lot of questions as to, well, why do we even have it here? Because if we pass it, your fund balance goes down. If you don't pass it, your fund balance goes down. Both of those statements are true, but it's important when you have large unexpected expenditures to bring it to your attention. So we're essentially asking you to ratify those payments that were made by, or decisions made by the board under Article 9.
Thanks, Bob. I really appreciate that explanation because I don't think I could have done it so well. So let's have questions about this article. I think I saw Andy's hand first, then Fisher's, and then we'll see where we are.
Thank you. Andrew Davis, District 9. So a number of years ago, the state had a law that we all had to have metered trash systems, meaning the more you throw, the more you pay. And I believe the rationale for that was to try to make the system more efficient, perhaps build some economy into it, that people were more. But when I look at these numbers, I mean, Article 9 says that the increased unexpected cost was 176, but the actual amount going from the previous year to the current budget year is closer to $500,000. And my first question, is that correct? The unexpected portion is 176, but when you look in the Finance Committee report, we've gone in overall solid waste expenses, including compost and recycling, from 627,000 total expenses. Yeah, to 1.13 million.
Okay. Let me try and answer that with humility. So, I think...
That's not my main question, but please answer that.
Yeah, let me try and answer that one anyway. I think what you're kind of talking about there are two different things. This is about an overspend in FY25. Patrick, you can help me when I get this wrong, please. So, our current contract with our previous contract with Triple T expired, June 30th last year. And we were operating under kind of an agreement, really, with Casella, who bought their business, until such a time as we could, arrive at a new contract. And so there were costs associated in FY25, right, the kind of current budget year that we're in, that we didn't anticipate, and this is those costs. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, I just
And
understand.
then so the number in
Yeah.
the Finance Committee report is really about solid waste in FY26, I believe.
Yes, that's right.
My question is there any investigating going on at the town level to keep, the reason I brought up the state law was that we were trying to make the system, I've heard Brattleboro's system referred to as a Cadillac system around the state, because we have municipal compost, we've got recycling, we're trying to do everything right, and this is makes healthcare increases look modest. And what are we doing
when
wrong
we get to the
here?
budget, you'll see that it doesn't, but...
Well, what I want to know, I know, sorry about that, shouldn't have brought that up. But what I'm saying is, are we looking at ways to, Casella just seems like more than we really want to pay for, hauling all of our trash to, are we thinking of any other creative solutions? That's my question, it ends with a question mark.
Yeah.
Are we investigating any things to keep these costs under control when it appears that doing everything right is busting our bank?
Yeah. So I think that stretches the limits of germaneness with regards to this article. I think it's really a question about what are we doing around solid waste in terms of efficiency, in terms of procurement during our new contract. I don't know when's a good time to talk about that. Maybe the budget article would be a better time, but I think this is really about that FY25 expenditure. Oh. Well, we have a nice
Better
view
door
of
than a
Patrick's
window.
back row. Well, I think I said Fisher was next. Alex Fisher.
Hello. Hello, Alex Fisher, District 8, formerly 2. 2 questions. 1, is this just a straight up yes, no? Or can we adjust the amount in this article like we can for the budget? And the second part is, I'm just trying to make sure I understand that this isn't about do we approve the spending or not. That's already happening. It's where is the money coming from?
These are 2 great questions for the town attorney.
The answer, I believe, is yes to both of them. So long as the town moderator deems an amendment germane to this, the amount of the appropriation from the fund balance could be increased or decreased. And that, subject to the town moderator, is probably germane, but that ruling would have to come from him at town meeting, okay? And secondly, you're correct, this is not an article that debates these particular expenditures. Those were decided by the select board and already made. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Bob. Other questions on this article about these expenditures from unassigned fund balance? Yes. And I've been doing such a good job with names and I'm blanking.
Hi, my name is Carol McManus.
Hi,
I'm in
Carol.
District 8. Hi, nice to see you. I think mostly the question that I have was answered. It seems to be
Would you just hold the microphone to your mouth?
it seems to be a twofold question. Yeah. So if the funding that is assigned, the balance is deferred, the RTM could amend the budget, which was just answered. And then the amount necessary to bring the assigned fund balance to that. And then it goes into the other piece, which is that's how, if we decide how much more, I just don't completely understand that part where FY 2026 budgetary needs of the town. However, if general fund over expenditures are repeated, it goes into that. then Vermont statutes come into place. Can someone just help me clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. So I think what you're asking is like all of those subsequent things that could happen if these kinds of things fail.
Right.
Is that how you understood it, Bob?
I may be getting your question incorrectly, but one, I think your question is twofold. One, I'm hearing, what amount does the town need to raise to bring its fund balance to 10%? Is that one of your questions? Because I don't have that answer, but we could certainly look up roughly what that amount would be.
Daniel?
Secondly, if you're talking about with regard to the, where I get into the statutes there, that's how you deal with when you have a true deficit. That would be if the town had no cash flow, no other fund balance to be able to operate. If that happens, that's a very serious matter. And in small towns don't have as much of the fund balance that a larger town like Brattleboro has. So we're lucky here in Brattleboro not to be in that position. But in the explanation there, I just wanted to outline the statutory options for dealing with a true deficit.
Thanks. Franz?
Thank you, Daniel. I may defer to the Finance Committee on this because the answer about how much money it would take to restore our fund balance to 10%, our unassigned fund balance to 10%, is in the Finance Committee report. I believe it's $1.18 million.
What page is it on?
11. And I don't know what that would translate to in terms of its effect on the tax rate, which would be an interesting question. But it's a substantial amount of money that we would have to raise to restore it all in one go. An alternative would be to raise part of that through increasing the tax rate, and then over a period of years, restore it to our guideline level.
Okay. Other questions on Article 9? Going to look for hands who haven't been recognized. At the back. Yep. Patrick at the back then. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Heidi Fisher, District 7.
Heidi.
This article, while I understand it's both of those amounts are coming from the unassigned fund balance, they seem like really disparate things, and I'm wondering whether they can be dealt with separately or whether they have to be voted on as one thing.
It's a great question. We made the warning. I remember we had a consideration of splitting up one of the questions. Was it this one?
It was this one, and we decided to keep them together because it's the same accounting principle at work.
And our town meeting moderator has raised their hands, so perhaps they have a perspective.
It would be.
Thanks, Liz.
It would be appropriate to have a motion to divide that question if it's made and if it's adopted.
Thanks, David.
David Gardenstein, moderator.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions about Article 9? Oscar? Just so you know, I'm trying to balance like who's speaking, so if you've spoken once before, you might need to wait a little bit.
Oscar Heller, District 9, current Finance Committee Chair. I am only really bringing this up because we wrote some advice in our report about this. I feel like it doesn't exactly line up with what ended up in the book, so I wanted to get a little clarification. It sounds like practically there is no difference whether we vote this article up or down, right? The money will come out of the general fund balance, the unassigned fund balance, one way or another. In our report, we say more or less that we should vote this article up because there are possible negative consequences to the town. Practically, it doesn't seem like that's actually the case, right? We know we have enough fund balance to cover this amount. So I'm a little, just speaking for myself, not the committee, but I'm a little now wary of the advice we put in there that it would be just a mistake to vote no on this article. And we may have overstated that slightly, since there seems to be no practical consequence either way. And then my only other note is to what Franz said. We do have a section where we look at what sort of estimating how much is left in the unassigned fund balance. It's very much an estimate, so just take that with a grain of salt in our report. Thank you.
Thanks, Oscar. Bob? John?
One,
Yeah.
with regard to voting no on this, it occurs to me that from the standpoint of the town's credit rating and ability to borrow, that a no vote would be potentially the making of a finding in next year's audit report, which can affect the town's ability to borrow. I totally acknowledge that those are some ifs there. It's not a full-blown, yes, that would be the result, because we otherwise have very good ability to borrow. But in terms of what the Finance Committee was recommending up, it's certainly cleaner from the standpoint of balancing the books to do that. But I leave that to, it's your decision.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Other questions? Kate, and then Gemma, and then Spoon.
Kate O'Connor, District 9. I just want to clarify something. Oscar's made me want to clarify this. If we use the unassigned fund balance, which is the surplus, that's what we're going to do. But if we say no, we will be deficit spending because we don't have that money in the FY25 budget. So when we see the audit of FY25, it's going to have a negative $851,000 in it. I just want to make it just clarify that,
Yep.
yes, we will be deficit spending, and that actually does make a difference, correct?
Correct. I'm seeing nods.
Yes.
Anyone want to
Yes.
elaborate on the nods?
Your deficit spending in the general fund, yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think I said Gemma was next. Down here. Gemma, down the front.
Thank you. Gemma Seymour, District 8. I'm just a little confused about the explanation in the Select Board Chair's report about why the contract increased so much in price for trash pickup.
Yeah.
Because it says, whether we would be interested in moving forward with a contract that did not provide for trash pickup but was still almost double the cost of our old one, or for a contract that provided trash pickup. How do you have a contract for trash pickup that doesn't include trash pickup and costs double what we were paying?
Did I make a typo or?
I don't know.
Okay, so thank you for reading my report. I
Certainly.
labored over it and then I was like, oh, this is terrible, but here you go. I did the best I could. So I feel like your question is, why is this more expensive than our old contract?
Yes.
Okay, so our old contract with Triple T that we had for many years, I think, Patrick, it went up 1% each year. We were lucky for a long time, and then Casella bought Triple T, and we entered the real world of what it actually might cost in today's market.
Okay.
And so the contract negotiations, well, first of all, we had an RFP process that resulted in one vendor that was interested, and then we engaged in contract negotiations for like 4 months, maybe?
More.
Longer?
We started about a year ago.
What I really meant was, is there an explanation for this in this book?
Is there an explanation for why specifically the contract was so more expensive? I don't think so. We had many meetings on it during the year, and certainly somebody watching some of those meetings would have seen lots of reasons why it was more expensive.
Yeah.
Negotiating with one vendor is a tough position to be in. We did the best we could, and ultimately where we landed, I think, as a board is, this is a public good. We need to have a high level of service in this town. People are accustomed to a high level of service. And so what I was trying to characterize, I think, in my report is really that we had a choice between a very much more expensive, kind of similar level of service to what we have, or a still actually really double what we used to pay level of service that didn't even include trash pickup.
That's what I was trying
and we
to get
didn't
at.
feel we
Okay.
didn't feel I didn't feel good about that.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
Me either.
Thank you.
So thank you. Thanks for reading the report. Spoon, I think, was next.
Spoonagabe, District 8. Perhaps the Select Board will bring a suggested plan for replenishing the fund balance rather than just saying it's going to be low and shrugging and walking away and saying somehow it'll get fixed. It would be a little more reassuring if there was some proposals about how it'll get fixed. The other thing was someone started off saying, has there been any creative thinking about trash? And evidently not. Well, I will start it. I'll
Remember
start
the
the
expectations
process.
at the beginning, speak to others like you'd like to be spoken to yourself.
The town can have a sanitation department and employ people and handle it itself.
I'll address the second part first. Yes, it absolutely could. Whether that could have been done in the less than 1 year, no, I don't think so. I forgot what your first question was because I got so sidetracked by that. Spoon, give me a summary of the first question, or somebody else help me.
I could. Replenishing
The replenishing the fund balance. Thank you. Yeah. So there's a new board that just, got voted in by you guys. Liz and Peter will be on the board with Oscar and Amanda and Isaac. They will take office in less than 2 weeks' time, and I would leave it to them to say what their intentions are around replenishing the fund balance. Okay. All right. So I think that that's a live question for the new board. I see hands, and I was kind of looking for people who are going to be on the board to speak. Okay. Sonia?
Thanks. Sonia Silbert, District 9. Going back to the impact of voting it yes or no, the Article 9, in the Finance Committee report on page 23, it says that a no vote would mean that the town would then increase property taxes to meet that amount, as opposed to deficit spending as opposed to the deficit spending that we were just saying. And so can there be some clarity on, it sounds like a yes vote is using, according to this, it says the yes vote will pay for that money from the unassigned fund balance with all the problems that just kind of got mentioned. A no vote would mean we'd have to raise property taxes.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Are you referring to what's on page 23 of the finance report? Okay. John?
I believe that might not be correct. I think that the spending has already occurred. It would show as a deficit. We would end up lowering the fund balance through the process as Bob described anyway. So I think that is a possible solution, but it's not necessary.
Okay, so it could happen, but
Daniel?
other things would need to occur. Franz?
Others could chime in as well, but my thinking about this is that we could restore that fund balance anytime. And if representative town meeting wanted to raise the budget by an amount that would permit us to restore the fund balance, then you could go ahead and do that. But that wouldn't take place in Article 9. I think you'd have to do that in Article 12, which is the general fund budget. So the two sort of work together, and actually you can kind of scope out a lot of combinations of what happens in Article 9 and what happens in Article 12. It gets a little bit hairy to think your way through all those possible combinations, but one thing that could happen is that Article 9 fails and the budget gets raised by an amount that would restore the fund balance, in which case, the taxes would have to go up by some significant amount, but it could be done.
Okay, thanks, Franz. I saw a question at the front.
District 7.
Would you mind waiting for the microphone, please? Thank you.
Quick question, because in the caucus, we talked about this trash situation. Can you explain exactly what the new thing is? We knew there's a new container you're buying, it's going to be delivered. This says we're still doing the pay-as-you-throw. What container do you put the other stuff in, recycling and compost? And then they said, no, it's still up in the air. We don't know what it is. What is it?
Yeah. Patrick or John, you want to speak to that?
You go ahead.
Sure. Good evening. So, really good question. I think probably the place to start is that pay-as-you-throw is the common name of describing the state requirement that trash be collected and disposed of based on either weight or volume. So regardless of what we do with the trash program, there's still an obligation to adhere to the terms of Act 148, and garbage needs to be paid for and collected by either weight or volume. The way we're doing that presently is through the bag system. I think everybody's pretty familiar with. Exactly how we address that issue going forward in, let's call it the future trash program, is still a little bit up in the air. We were meeting about that this week. We've got another meeting about that next week. There are a couple of different options that we've been working through and discussing. One of which is to continue to use the bag program and to just couple the bag program with the automated collection program. The other solution that we were reviewing was it is perfectly acceptable in the eyes of the state to provide a base level of service, and as long as if you require more than the base level of service, that costs you more. So one way to achieve that using an automated collection system is to say, you know, here's a 48-gallon trash can, and it's going to get collected every other week. If you need more than that, then you could contract separately with Casella for the off-week collection, such that you would be receiving weekly collection, but at a cost which is higher than the person who gets by every other week. Does that make sense?
Okay, perfect. I just wondered if we had to buy bags.
That is the subject of work that is happening very presently, and probably I would expect staff to be taking the issue and a recommendation for how to proceed to the board in the next 2 to 3 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that, probably in April.
And recycling and composting being how they are.
So composting is super simple. Composting won't change one bit. Same containers, continue to use the containers you've used. It'll get collected weekly, no change there whatsoever. Recycling will become every other week, and there's still some discussion about what's the proper size of a recycling cart. The two that are really kind of up for discussion, one is a 64-gallon container, which is a pretty good size can. The other is a 96-gallon container, which is an even larger can. Here we're balancing two different sort of competing interests. One is nobody wants a gargantuan, recycling bucket. At the same time, when you look at the 64-gallon bucket and you consider every other week collection, boy, you get a couple of cardboard boxes in there and you get a few more of this and that and the other, you could start to run out. And the fear or the concern is that recycling will find its way into the trash stream. So I think Brattleboro has been, somebody mentioned the Cadillac program, and that's certainly the way the state of Vermont considers the program. There really is nothing like it anywhere else in the state. And the degree to which we have successfully diverted materials out of the landfill is, impressive by anyone's standard across the state. So,
thanks, Patrick. I feel like we're drifting a little away from the purpose of this article. So it's about unassigned fund balance. I think, let's see, whose hand did I see next? I think it was Fisher's at the back there, Alex Fisher.
Hello, Alex Fisher again. My question that I'm assuming won't be answered tonight, but would be nice to put on the list of questions is, Of these two amounts, what has already been spent, what has been committed, and what is planned to be spent?
Great.
Specifically with the Downtown Safety Action Plan.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really clear question. We'll write it down and we'll do our best to get it back to you. Let's hear from Christina.
Christina Cheyenne, District 8. So I'm getting a little confused, and I worked on this Finance Committee report, and yeah, thanks for bringing up things that don't match what we're hearing tonight, and that's what I wanted to clarify because I'm hearing new information tonight, and I wanted to say on page 20, the Finance Committee, I'm on page 23 of the Finance Committee report and page 20 of the big giant book. And we didn't want to duplicate this big giant book. So there's a really good explanation of the options on page 20 of the big book that has 3 options, although now I'm hearing a different thing from our town attorney. So I just wanted to clarify. I think I have it figured out. So the last paragraph on page 20 says that the first option is that we vote yes, and the first possible remedy is vote a special tax to make up the deficit as described above. And the unassigned fund balance would cover it, right? Then the second alternative is to borrow money through bonding to refund the deficit. And I think what I'm hearing tonight is that there would be no borrowing money through bonding to refund the deficit because we have money in the fund balance. So I think that's where the confusion is. And the third option would be to raise taxes. That's where that came into our Finance Committee report, is that the third option, if the first two were not employed, then taxes could be raised, but it would have to be by 5%, which is too much.
Yeah.
Does that clarify?
Let me just kind of say one very clear, simple layperson's thing. That's if it gets voted down, right?
No.
Bob, you want to?
That's really if you have a true deficit. We are not in a deficit position. We have fund balance. We actually, for general purposes, a healthy fund balance, even though it's going to be, downsized somewhat from this. So what I think, to clarify or answer your question, is you're looking at what you're looking or considering as a deficit in the general fund, but it doesn't create an overall town fund balance. So we don't get to those 3 alternatives for curing a deficit because we have other fund balance to use. So option 1 is to appropriate the money out of the fund balance, but if you wanted to, you could implore these others. Doing bonding doesn't make any sense. It's expensive, long-term. The 5% tax would raise far more than what you would need to make up for that, the expenditures in Article 9. So, and the other option is to put money into the budget equal to what you're doing. So in terms of dovetailing with the Finance Committee's report on page 23, we just went over a yes. It says a yes vote on Article 9 authorizes the Select Board to use $852,000 from the unassigned fund balance to balance its proposed budget. A no vote, it says would in effect, and this is as written, I don't agree with the way the Finance Committee has that written, would require the town to amend the budget by adding $852,000. That would not be required. If you wanted to get the fund balance back to where it actually would be, you could amend the budget upwards to raise taxes so that you stay at whatever level you wanted to stay at. But I'm not sure it's the 852 or a lower amount. I think it's a much lower amount than that. But those are your your
Thanks, Bob.
options. And that's why we put this before the budget article, so that you then, because a lot of these questions actually go to the budget when you get to the budget.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, so then the options that you wrote in on page 20, the second alternative is to borrow money through bonding to refund the deficit. That really the second alternative is to still just take the money from the fund balance, but have that $850,000 deficit when the books get audited next year, correct?
I'm not sure I follow you. That last paragraph is really only in the event that the town fund balance goes down to below zero, and that's not the case.
Okay. Arthur Davis is frantically gesturing at me.
Arthur Davis, District 8. So I think it might help. I think this is what Attorney Fisher is saying, but in other words, we don't, none of those three things in the last paragraph are relevant to us at all on this year, because we don't have a zero fund balance. So it's there, that paragraph is totally irrelevant until future years. Is that correct, Bob?
That's correct.
And that's said with love, right?
Right. The end of the previous paragraph kind of speaks to that.
Yes, the previous paragraph says, if the general fund over expenditures are repeated in future years, the town's unassigned fund balance eventually reduces to where the town has difficulty in making payment obligations. When this happens, the statutes provide the alternatives, and then you've got that last paragraph. We're not in those dire straits at this point. Okay.
Thanks, Bob. Further questions on Article 9? Kate O'Connor.
Sorry, everybody, to belabor this. Kate O'Connor, District 9. I just want to clarify, if we don't use the unassigned fund balance, we're going to have an $851,000 deficit in our operating budget at the end of FY25. That's my first question. Second, we keep saying, oh, we have enough money in the fund balance, it's going to be okay. I think it would be really helpful for us to understand where all this other money in the fund balance is. Just because you're all saying, oh, this is okay, don't worry. But where is the other money in the fund balance, so that at the end of FY25, even though we're going to have if we have a negative 851,000, where is the other money coming from to cover that $851,000 deficit in the budget? Do you see what I'm saying? Everybody's going, don't worry, don't worry. Where is that money that's going to cover that negative $851,000 in the FY25 budget?
John?
So in the audit, in the back of this report, you'll see that we have a fund balance of about $1.9 million. This is asking town meeting, would you spend 0.8 of that to pay for the expenditures that have already happened? So that there is 1.9 million in the fund balance. Is that your question? No.
It's my again, Kate O'Connor, I thought the understanding is that in the audit for FY24, we end the year with a $1.9 million balance in the unassigned fund balance. Yes. What I'm saying is, if we don't choose to use the unassigned fund balance for this 851, which would bring us down to 1.1 million in the unassigned fund balance for FY24 or 25, everybody seems to be saying up here, yes, if we don't use the unassigned fund balance, we will have a negative $851,000 deficit. We'll have an $851,000 deficit at the end of FY25. At the same time, you're saying, but it's okay because we have money in the fund balance to cover it. My question is, can you tell us specifically what money, where is this money that's in this fund balance that it'll be okay that we have a negative 851,000 if we deficit spend? Does that make sense?
You can tell from my face that I'm not
so, yeah, it's a little complicated. So It's just an accounting thing. So there is a $1.9 million reserve. We can either show that in next year's audit as we brought it down to $1.1 million reserve and covered these expenditures that have already been made, or the audit can show that we deficit spent, like we didn't approve that, we deficit spent that, it would still have been paid out of the fund balance. So the fund balance would be reflected at $1.1 million anyways. It would just show differently in the audit. And that could, as Bob was saying, that could have an impact on our ability to borrow in the future. It might not, but that's the only risk, I think, here. So.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Franz, you still want to speak?
No, I was going to say much the same thing. The money's going to come out of fund balance one way or the other.
Right.
The question is it going to be part of our budget coming out of fund balance, or is it going to be not part of the budget coming out of the fund balance? And what the implications are, those things is what they've just addressed.
Go ahead.
I just want us to make I just want to make sure that we're all clear that we're not talking about this big fund balance of $10 million somewhere.
Oh.
That you know, because it sort of seems like, oh, don't worry, everybody.
No.
It one way or another, we're going to be down to $1.1 million in our fund balance. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, so we've typically held a fund balance of somewhere around about $2 million during the time that I've been on the board. And that's unassigned, sitting there, doing nothing, not assigned to anything. Yeah. Is that accurate? Yes. Okay, good. More questions on Article 9. We're an hour in, just letting you know that. Abby.
Abby Manukin, District 8. I'm grateful to the Finance Committee for their report and was looking at page 20 to detail some of the proposed difference in expenditures for the solid waste. And they have expenditures and revenue. And I'm curious, I don't see anything reflected there about selling the compost, which I thought was something that was done. And I'm also curious about town efforts to generally get more people to compost. My understanding is that it would be required at some point at the state level. I know not everybody in town composts, and it's made a huge difference in terms of how much trash has ended up in the landfill. And the more people who compost, the less trash there will be, and that would impact how much we're spending here in terms of increased cost if we have increased revenue. So I'm curious if there's anything happening on that.
I think in the same way that I didn't allow Andy's kind of general inquiry about solid waste, I'm not going to allow that in this particular point. Like maybe in the budget we could talk more about that. Other questions about this use of unassigned fund balance? Oscar.
Just a 2-second comment that I think may save time. About the Finance Committee report, there's a lot in there about process, including, for example, what would happen if this was voted down. This is stuff that we got from conversations with John and Bob and Patrick and other department heads. I personally, if there's something where you think you know the answer and it's not what's in there, I'm happy to accept that as a correction. And so I think the report on process stuff happily defers to your interpretation of that as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Other questions on Article 9? Okay, let's move on. Article 10. So we're back on page 15. To see what compensation the town will pay its select board members. Whew, fun. The chair currently gets $10,000. The other board members get $8,000, I think. That's an annual salary. It was raised a few years back by town meeting. Town meeting has the authority to set compensation at what it wishes. Questions? Carol.
Carol from District 8. I'm just, is this the same article? I read somewhere or heard that there's a contract, every year there's an increase. Is that Does that apply to the select board? Is that what that is?
We actually don't get an increase every year.
You don't? So that must be something else.
Yeah,
And I know
that's-
you don't make a lot of money. Thank you all for your service.
You're welcome. Thank you. Let the record show there was a smattering of applause. I think Spoon was next.
Spoon Agave, District 8. It says in the chair's report or the select board report, but I was reading in the town report that the average select board member does about 100 hours a year in select board meetings and about 100 hours a year in other meetings. That's 200 a year. That's about $40 an hour, which is probably about a third more than the average wage earner in this town. And I say it because I do expect a lot. Because of that, I expect a lot. That's pretty good pay for what's being done. And it's way different from the way it always used to be. But it's okay if you do the work.
Is there a question? No. Okay. So the number of hours was arrived at by my calculation on my service on top of my full-time job. I can't speak for my colleagues as to whether or not that was, accurate for them. Liz?
Well,
I know, sorry.
I probably spend about 10 hours a week, and there's 52 weeks in the year, so that's 500 hours.
Liz was, it is on, it just didn't pick it up all of a sudden. Do you want to say that again?
I probably spend about 8 to 10 hours a week, and there's about 50 weeks a year, so that's $500.
Okay. Other questions about this article? Sonia and then Gemma.
Sonia Silbert, District 9. This doesn't have a proposal about what we actually should pay the select board. Is the expectation that somebody is going to show up to the, what my question is, that someone will propose this number and then we'll debate that?
Yeah, so each one of these questions has a motion that goes with it, and the motion would contain the dollar figures.
Okay, and is the motion going to be 10 and 8?
I would expect so, yeah.
Okay, and that comes from you all.
Yes,
Cool, thank you.
but is based on what you all approve. Gemma?
That was my question.
Okay, great. Yes, we will definitely be starting somewhere. Whether we'll end in the same place remains to be seen. Okay, who has a question about Article 10? Nobody. Moving on then to Article 11. Whew. I'm not going to read all this. So this is human service organization funding. So to see if the town will raise and appropriate the sum of $461,276 to support these 42 organizations in varying amounts. There is information on pages 21 through 23. And then I think further there are human service organization kind of like reports later on in pages 97 through 105. Questions about this? Carol. Yeah, you're welcome to use either microphone.
sorry.
Yeah.
Exercise,
Make them
I'm
work,
sorry.
short timer.
Carol, District 8. I was just curious because as I'm reading through this, Article 11, and you put the funds, like you had 461, 277, there's all these numbers. What is the actual percentage of the budget that goes to human services?
Oh, I can answer this one. So that 461,000, I believe, was equivalent to 2% of the previous general fund budget, the previous year's general fund budget. John?
And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it's about 1.8% of this year's budget, since it went up a little bit. Yep.
Yeah, and so, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Yes, that's the answer to that question. Other questions on this article? Kathy?
Kathy here for District 9. I'm sorry, and this may be something I should have understood, but I've been busy. This was an article that we voted on, so can you just explain how this article in the warning relates to what was actually on our ballot when we voted?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I can. Page 14 of this booklet has the warning for the March 4th annual town meeting. It's really an election, an Australian ballot. That's how you all ended up here. And Article 6 on that question says, shall the voters of the town of Brattleboro, so the whole electorate, advise representative town meeting, you lot, to authorize human services funding in fiscal year 26, which is this budget, and in future budgets for one of these following options. There were 5 options, and it's an advisory article. It didn't have any binding impact. And so the results of that vote are on the town's website, on the town clerk's page under election results. And so you can see, and Christina's pointing somewhere. It's in the Finance Committee report on page 25, thank you. And it, you can interpret those results as you may and be so advised. Other questions on Article 11? Frick.
Frick Sprite, District 9. Just a couple of quick things. I would like to first greatly, again, appreciate the work of the Human Services Committee. I remember the days before they existed and the long drawn out popularity contest over a relatively small part of our budget. So thank you for your hard work. I would like to also say in my conversations with members of the committee, it is my understanding that if we change the percentage from what was originally suggested, that the division might ideally be changed also based on their understanding of the various needs and priorities. And I would encourage people to be open to accepting whatever their recommendations on that. I would also like to urge people to pay attention to the totality of the votes that happen on the recommendation and notice that even though one got somewhat more than some of the others, they were all relatively in the same range. And so there's a wide diversity of public preference.
This feels a lot like advocacy at this point.
I'm just pointing out
urging.
That's
it's definitely advocacy.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions or questions? Okay. Arthur?
Yeah, I guess Arthur Davis, District 8. Frick addressed this a little bit, but I guess I'm curious to hear from someone who's on the Human Services Committee, which is that I think just to preface a little bit the question, I think there is precedent from a couple years ago for RTM adjusting the amount at RTM, and I don't know what happened then, but I guess I'm wondering what happened to the division between organizations at that point, and what would be the process if it was adjusted either up or down if that happened this year.
Okay, I can tell you what my memory is, and then process-wise, we might need to get some help. So, this is an article about whether we'll raise and appropriate a dollar figure, and it's split up in the way that the committee is described, but the meeting can make a decision about the total dollar figure. I guess it could also make decisions about individual organizations. I think what Frick's alluding to maybe is in the past that's how the process had to work, and so the meeting has devolved that to this Human Services Review Committee. If there are members of that committee, could you just raise your hand for a second? Yeah, so a couple of people, David and Tara, and this committee worked for several months on these proposals and allocations. So yeah, the amount can get amended, and whatever the meeting wants to do with regards to the amount is what will happen. Abby? And then process-wise, I remember some clunky stuff happened a couple of years ago, but essentially the amount can be amended, yes. Okay, do you want to just clarify it for me then?
My question is, what would happen if we amended it either up or down, the total amount? How would that affect the individual allocations to specific organizations?
Yeah. Well, I guess you'd need to figure it out as a body.
Well, I guess my question is, what is the process? Is there a specific process, or is there not?
I don't
Maybe
believe
that's the
there's a
answer.
specific process, but I can say that I can say that in previous years, there were proposals made to like increase everything by such and such a percentage or so forth. David, do you want to speak to it? Would you mind, Abby? Thank you.
David Miner, District 7 Chair of the Human Services Committee. I think a couple years ago it was decided, as I recall, there was some focus on individual organizations, and I think that there was additional appropriations for that. There was also appropriations for maybe a kind of a higher portion, kind of a. We go through a rubric decision using that rubric as a basis to make our decisions, and I think that the organizations that scored higher were given a little bit more money, but all of that decision was made on the floor, so the committee did not need to get back together in order to make any decisions. If in fact the committee or the RTM were to make a decision to provide more money or less money, then the Human Services Committee would have to get together. Yet the Human Services Committee as a group, we're done. So you're electing a new Human Services Committee later in the meeting. I think it would be unfair to have a new committee have to go through that whole process to understand what we spent hours of reviewing trying to figure out what to do. So my recommendation, if that were to happen, would be to say that the existing committee be reappointed to be able to take care of the new decision, and then the new committee would be appointed to take care of the future business.
Thanks, David. A little advocacy then. Abby?
Thanks, Abby Manukin, District 8. Kathy, just a quick thing about your question. I think that what we voted on was Article 13, which is the percentage that we are considering for the next year's budget. And so it doesn't as much relate to Article 11, which is what was already decided on by the Human Services Committee for this year. But then my question is, I think you said that this percentage was 2% of last year's budget and 1.8% of this year's budget, but the way it's written out, this is for FY26. So is it 2%?
So the dollar
Which
figure
year?
that the committee is given as a kind of like starting point to work with is arrived at by a percentage of the previous year's adopted general fund budget. And the percentage that the representative town meeting decided in the previous year was 2%. And so we said, what is 2% of the FY25 budget? That's what you'll have to work with in the FY26 budget.
And the ballot.
And the ballot? You want to speak to that?
Well, yeah, Abby had a clarification about the budget that I believe is incorrect. The element on the ballot was for both FY25 and FY26 advisory.
FY26 and future budgets. Tom, yeah.
Yes, actually, it's,
Yeah, thank you. It's so everyone can hear you.
Tom Franks, District 9. The 461,726 is 2% of fiscal year 25, the year we are
Yes.
in. That's what was discussed at the last representative town meeting. The ballot article says what amount shall be for in the fiscal 26, the budget year we're approaching, and future years. So I think the assertion that the discussion at this coming representative town meeting has no impact, or this ballot article has no impact on the discussion, I believe is not accurate according to the language of the ballot article. Thank you.
The ballot article was advisory to you. To everyone who is an elected representative town meeting member for this year, it is advisory to you. You may interpret it in whatever way you wish to and take the advice or not take it and serve at your peril. France. That's how it works, right? Like, you're advised and then you do what you're told or not, and then,
So my train of thought just got derailed by Tom there. Give me just a second. There's a couple of things that are important here, I think. One of which is that this whole mechanism is unusual, because what's happening here is that representative town meeting tells the select board, here's what we want you to put in the warning for next year, 2% of the current year's budget. So then we put that in the warning, but it's up to you to decide whether that's the right amount or not. So the vote that will happen is based on our doing what you asked us to tell you to do the following year, which is we don't do anything else this way. So I think there's a real question here of whether that's the right way to do this. For example, we could manage this by simply putting in the warning to see how much the town will raise to fund social services with no number involved, rather than us putting in the number that town meeting last year wanted to see you responsible for this year. So my point is just that this is a very convoluted way that the select board ends up saying, okay, here's what we want, except that it's not necessarily what we want. It's what an old RTM gave instructions to the new RTM to do. So there could be other ways to go about this, and the select board is kind of like an innocent bystander in this. It's not really our recommendation. It's your recommendation from the past coming around to meet you in the future.
Okay, thank you. I see a lot of hands. Let's hear from people we haven't heard from at the back.
Thank you, Patrick. You're going to love this. Hugh
you
Barber,
introduce yourself?
District 9.
Thank you.
I have no problem with giving money to these organizations. What problem I do have is some of these organizations own real estate that are already getting substantial tax reductions as granted from Montpelier. And I don't believe they should be double dipping. I think that issue should be resolved to ascertain the people that really need the money and are not getting a double benefit from the town. Now that's a longer issue to discuss tonight, but I think at some point the committee needs to resolve who does get discounts on property taxes, and I think they should be disqualified from getting more from the human service allocation.
Okay, thank you. Cyrus? I will hear from Mr. Moderator, but let's hear from Cyrus first of all.
Hello, my name is Cyrus Smith, and I am now a general public member of District 7. I would like to potentially clarify what we're talking about. So we're talking about the budget that is allocated to human services. It is made up of percentages of a bigger budget, and the ballot that we voted on, are advisory, and it is basically you polling the public to see how they feel on where their money goes and how much of the budget is. Your advisement from the select board is a percentage of last year's budget that went to these services. You can do the math from how much the budget is to convert it to how much that percent is, and then you can compare it to the percentage of your budget. So you can then take your cash dollar numeral and compare them so you know how much you're legitimately spending instead of just a percentage, because sometimes it is hard to wrap your head around what a percentage of a large number is. So in short, the ballot is to tell you how the town feels. The advisory from the select board is how much money that you spent in a percentage on these services last year. And the percentage is the percentage of this budget that they are coming forward and saying, this is how much I think the budget is going to be. And then you can take those percentages and convert them to numbers so you have a better understanding. Am I correct?
It's kind of complicated. I don't think I would phrase it like that, but I think you're right in the ballpark. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Moderator.
David Gardenstein, moderator. I just want to address the process for dealing with this article relating to human services funding. And so it's comment rather than question. I think that over the last 10 years, the process for allocating human services money has developed in two different tracks. Right, there used to be substantial discussion at the meeting about what each individual organization would get. And town meeting voted as a group to form the Human Services Funding Committee and to delegate the responsibility to allocate the money so that we were not having popularity contests at town meeting. In addition, about 5 years ago, if I recall correctly, 3, 4, 5 years ago, we added the article to town meeting where the percentage of the budget was going to be determined at town meeting for the next year. So we have an article from last year that town meeting directed select board to allocate 2% of the FY 25 budget to human services funding in FY 26. So this body has already determined that the amount is 2%, and a committee of this body has already determined what the allocations between various organizations would be. I don't believe that in the last 5 years since I've been moderator, that the number has gone up and down for the allocation, the total allocation, or that individual organizations have gotten more or less money. I think that was before the body was determining what next year's total amount would be. So my view preliminarily is that this is really an up or down vote on this article.
Thanks. Further questions on Article 11? Carol.
I'm Carol McManus, and I'm from District 8. I first want to commend the committee, the Human Service Committee, who got so much because, as most of you know, the needs that are being met, that are needed to be met are way.
I'm hearing rumbles of dissent.
What? The question's coming. Okay, so the question is to this whole thing. I want to commend them because they got a lot of requests and they did not, it was tough to choose, and they didn't give the amount of money to all of the people for what they asked. That's it. I'm asking this town, you representatives of all 3 districts, And really, what do you think is going to happen? That's a question. And you answer it in your head, not to me. If we do not continue to help our neighbors
Thank you, Carol.
in need.
Thank you, Carol.
It's a question for all of you to think about before you try.
Thank you. And there are many questions for this body to consider before town meeting on March 22nd. Is there anything further on this article?
Daniel, I have a question for the town attorney.
Okay.
I'm wondering if there is, the question relates to if the amount, if this is not approved and instead is sent back to the Human Services Committee for a new amount to be determined or for the sub-amounts to be determined, wouldn't then whatever that committee figures out have to come back to town meeting for approval in the end? Or would there have to be some action by town meeting to delegate that authority in totality to its committee? Procedurally, it seems complicated to me enough that if RTM wants to change this in any way, that perhaps it should be stipulated in what happens at town meeting, what those changes are, so that another town meeting isn't needed to ratify the work of the Human Services Committee.
Thank you. Bob?
I think we'll have to look at that and provide an answer, because a lot of that depends on what the motion would be. Because if there's no motion to delegate or go back with a lower number, then I agree with the moderator, you've got an up or down vote. If it gets voted down and it's a number here, well then that's a vote, there's no money going to any of these organizations. So I think a lot depends on the motion, and we may need to discuss the procedure for that with the moderator between now and town meeting.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
I think we've had instances where the amount was raised by a certain percentage. So if it's raised by a certain percentage or reduced by a certain percentage, the allocation can be raised or lowered accordingly. That's been done in the past, and that seems quick and easy.
Agreed. Yeah, I recall that. Other questions on Article 11? Yes, sir. Tom Franks. Thought I was free and clear of that one.
Tom Franks, District 9. I didn't want to let you off the hook so easily. I've been listening to what another member had said. I was thinking about what another member said. Mr. Barber's question is not appropriately directed to the Finance Committee. His question is how much of the property in the town is tax exempt that is owned by nonprofits. That's appropriately a question would be the listers, of which I'm one, but fortunately in this town, I don't have to answer that question. We have a professional assessor's office. So I'm going to ask a question. If the amount of property and the identified property and the properties owned could be identified, so that Mr. Barber's question could be answered at town meeting.
Yeah, I think we'll put it on the list. I don't see it quite as germane right now. Anything further on Article 11? Okay, so Article 12, to see how much money the town will raise, appropriate, and expend to defray all of its expenses and liabilities, in addition to any funds authorized for any other articles in these warnings, is a fancy way of saying, hey, it's about their budget. And so historically, there's a long-winded budget presentation at this point, and I am not going to do that. I'm going to keep it pretty high level, and then we'll take your questions. Okay, so the total budget for FY26 is $25.2 million. It's an increase of 9.2% on the previous year's budget, and a 12.1% increase to the property taxes that need to be raised to fund that budget compared to the previous year. The notable changes in expenditures are as follows. Solid waste expenditures are up by $520,000. Health insurance expenditures are up by $514,000. Police staffing expenditures are up by $499,000. Notable changes in revenue, well, I already kind of mentioned it. We'll need to raise more property taxes to cover these expenditures, and the additional property taxes will amount to $2.1 million. The main reason for the discrepancy between the increase in the budget and the increase in the tax rate is largely because we are not using any fund balance to effectively buy down the tax rate. There's more to that, I'm sure, but I will keep it pretty high level for that. And then I'll go back to my notes. I want to talk about how we got here. So the select board took an action in September that agreed to fund what was called the Downtown Safety Action Plan. It was an article, it was a decision that the board made which had implications for the FY25 budget, which is kind of what we were talking about in, I think, Article 9. And it was also a commitment to the FY26 budget. The decision was made for a variety of reasons. A great deal of feeling around public safety in this town that we spent the summer working on. And my phone should not freeze. I should have printed this out. The paper does not freeze. That decision that we made to put that money in the budget for FY26 was made before we saw the budget. It was made with knowledge of the impact to the tax rate as it pertained to that bit of spending, but it was before we'd seen the entire budget. On November 5th, the board was presented with a base budget, meaning a budget that funds the same level of service as the previous year. The only difference in it was that added to it was the additional police spending for the new programming. And that budget showed a likely increase of 22% to property taxes at that time. A week later, on the 12th, there was a budget open house at the library, and members of the public came, talked with department heads, looked at budget material, and provided feedback. And the board received that feedback on the 19th. The major feedback was the budget is too high, bring it down. In November, we continued to work on the budget. We also continued to work towards a decision about what to do with our solid waste contract. As John had mentioned earlier, there was work going on for around a year on our solid waste contract after the one with Triple T expired, and we needed a new contract. And that's kind of maybe where we can speak to some of the whys with the solid waste. But the solid waste decision that the board made was to go for a fairly comparable level of service. So compost, recycling, and trash. There was a slight adjusted schedule, so rather than weekly recycling, it's bi-weekly. As I mentioned earlier, the cost of the solid waste contract increased by quite a bit, and we wrestled with what to do about that. And the board eventually landed in a place where we felt that the level of service was the most important thing, particularly with regards to equity. And so that solid waste decision plus the police spending kind of had baked two big increases into this FY26 budget. When we saw the budget in its totality, when we got some feedback from the open house, we pondered it, and then on the 19th, the 19th of November, we met and we asked the town administration to bring us back a revised budget with a 10% reduction and a 5% reduction. We gave them as much leeway as possible to figure out how to make those reductions rather than micromanage, because quite frankly, I don't think we're qualified to do that. we let the people that actually run their departments understand where they could make cuts. And we did ask them to, as much as possible, preserve the decisions that we'd made around downtown safety and around trash. We asked them to avoid cutting positions as much as possible. And so at that time, the town administration worked on it, for about a month and brought us back a revised budget on December 17th, which we reviewed. And what we reviewed was a series of proposed revisions, changes, cuts, deferments, different ways of spending money that impacted the bottom line of the general fund. We accepted 41 of the changes, and I think there were about 50 something proposed originally. The 41 changes resulted in a $1.77 million reduction in the general fund budget, which meant that we were kind of looking at the 12.1% tax increase that you have in the budget before you, as opposed to the 22% tax increase. We then had 2 meetings in January where there was further consideration of this now revised budget, took feedback from the public, and eventually in our second meeting in January, made a unanimous decision to bring forward this version of the budget that you have in front of you today. I could talk about some of the cuts that were made. They are also in a memo from our meeting on January 3rd. Well, actually, the memo is from January 3rd. I think the meeting was maybe January 6th or 7th. 7th, John tells me. So some of those cuts were things like reducing the cost of living allowance across the whole town staff to 3%, reducing non-union wage steps by 1%, no longer funding a subsidy for the Cow Power program, some increases in expected reimbursements in the police department, reducing stormwater upgrades, doing less maintenance at the library, postponing the hiring of the emergency services data analyst position. I could go on, there's 41 of them. I would say that's worth looking at. I think the Finance Committee has a version of that sheet in there as well in the addendum. I would say the way it's described in the Finance Committee report maybe doesn't quite catch how some of the cuts were presented to us in the meeting. And so I would say, looking at that January 7th memo as well as the Finance Committee report. And honestly, if you want to watch our process on it, it was a little lightning round-esque. And so we made a lot of hard decisions about whether we would accept this cut or this deferment, et cetera, and ended up in a place where we had reduced the budget by nearly $2 million, and we brought the tax rate down 10%. And so for me, that's really the story of this year's budget. We could get into the weeds on all of the lines. I think if you want to spend time with the lines, you'll find that it's mostly pretty lean. But really, those 2 areas of increased spending on solid waste, increased spending on police department expenses, and then other things such as the kind of benefit increases, which is a little more baked in, but is also tied to how many staff do we have? It's also tied to our finance software, which more accurately forecasts for us how much we're going to need to spend on health insurance than we used to. We used to just use an average figure, and now it's much more granular because it knows this employee has a single plan, this employee has a family plan. So we get more accurate figures, but unfortunately in that case it's costing us more money. So I'm going to stop there, and if folks have questions about the budget, this would be a great time for them. Spoon, and then Arthur. I thought I saw Frick's hand, but he took it down. And then Frick.
On page, 2 pages, 139, and again on, and another page 167. They both, at the lower end, the bottom of 139, bonds and notes. There's something I clearly don't understand, and I'm seeking illumination here. It seems, well, I just don't know what that means. I see, it sounds like we have somewhat less than $1 million in loans and over 300,000 in interest. And I can't imagine we're paying 33% interest, so there's clearly something I don't understand. And then there's more about debt on 167, which is not real clear to me. I'm trying to understand what the town's current debt situation is.
Okay. I think the town manager's office would probably be best place to answer that.
So that funding is primarily for loans that we already have, I believe, for things like, we're still paying for the fire station and the police station. We're paying for the $4.1 million loan for the generational improvements at Living Memorial Park. There's a whole series. These are reported on in the Selectboard's financial reports quarterly. The amount for principal and for interest, those aren't really related. Those are based on the schedules from the bond bank for the particular loan. I would have to look at them individually to know what the interest rate was on each one of those. It is far less than 33%. What else? I think that.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I mean, I guess the way I read it with my sort of more layperson's eyes is we pay we're projected to pay $1.3 million in debt service in FY26, and it's a mix of principal and interest, just like your car loan, your mortgage, that kind of thing. But we have, loans out that far exceed 1.3. That's just the year's worth of annual payments.
Yeah, and I think there was a question about like where are we in terms of our ability to borrow? And I think that last time I looked at the guidelines that we have from the select board, we're well under the limits there. We have, I think, maybe 8 or 10 million capacity, something like that. Patrick may know off the top of his head better than I do. Something like that, given the select board's guidance on taking out loans. So we're in pretty good shape that way.
Thanks, John. Arthur?
Yeah. I think that it's on. Oh, yes, it's on. Question about solid waste. So I think this is probably a question for the town manager's office. I guess I'm wanting to look. I know we're talking about this year's budget. I'm kind of curious where you see this going in down the road. And maybe that's not germane for right now. And if you deem that that's the case, I'll accept that. But I guess I'm thinking, we're both approving this year's budget, but we're also kind of setting a precedent for like, this is where we're going with solid waste. And I'm kind of wondering, that's a general question. You can kind of take it where you want to, but.
I mean, we did commit to a 5-year contract with Casella, so we can definitely say that
Yes, so with the solid waste, that is a 5-year commitment, and I believe it's a 3% increase per year, so that's what we'll see over the course of that contract. We will, of course, in the future be looking for competition. That's always better for price, so we hope that at the end of and that's why we did like 5 years instead of, I think the Triple T one was 10 years, but that was such a sweet deal. It was really good for the town to have that long-term contract. But yeah, and that's the same with other things. It's like we are committed on certain things like contracts. Others are somewhat unpredictable. So for example, we'll be going into collective bargaining starting this summer. That's really up in the air. We don't know what those negotiations will result in, but that will have the biggest impact on our future budgets.
No, that's helpful. Thanks.
Frick, I think, was next. Anyone who wishes to is more than welcome as well to come to this standing microphone.
Thanks, Arthur, for turning my last attempt into a question. This is actually a question, and it follows on his. I have been encouraging you guys to take a more holistic look at the budget long term, and I'm wondering to what degree you have discussed that and attempted that. I have not actually caught wind of any of it during any of the meetings I've attended. But I have been deeply concerned about the single bidder contracts where people know what the budget is ahead of time. That's deeply troubling to me. And baking in these long-term obligations, which we just discussed. I mean, 3.1 million is 15% of the budget? Is that right? That's going towards debt service. So that's a significant item there. The degree to which we might be able to use current staff to take care of what otherwise would be considered capital projects is we have a lot of talent in-house. I think we're not using that, so I'm hoping that that's in the mix. Also, I was wondering if there's been any conversation with, say, the school department and maybe some other towns in collaborating on self-insuring for healthcare. My understanding is that from the past is that about 500 people is a good number to start to think of that, and we have just in Brattleboro, I think we're closing in on about 200 employees. So any thoughts on that?
Sure.
Any of those things?
Yeah, I think I heard two questions. So I think the first question was, did the board publicly consider multi-year kind of budget planning? I don't think so. I think we looked at the FY26 budget. If anyone has a different recollection, you can let me know.
John Potter gave an explanation for that in a recent meeting, and maybe he'd like to repeat that.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that we could do if the board wanted to spend the time on it. You'd have to look at what would be the cost of doing that. So there's a cost to information. We could spend time doing that and making guesses about what the future holds, and that can be helpful. That can be a good thing to do. But like to spend the time. I guess I like to think back to, like, say 2019. If we were to do a multi-year budget plan in 2019, not knowing that COVID was going to happen, not knowing that ARPA was going to come in, not knowing that the Triple T contract was going to run out, not knowing that inflation was going to be at 8 or 9%, all those things would be like very hard to predict, and we can certainly, it can be beneficial to make guesses about those, do scenarios, things like that. Some of the risk there is that you start to show contractors, unions, everyone else starts to show what your sensitivity is, so that can lead to a negotiating position that's less robust. Might not, but those are some of the considerations on doing that, but we certainly can do that. I think one of the things that the next select board may want to do is to look at our scope of services, and like I've mentioned, the cost per capita to deliver municipal services in Brattleboro is $2,080. That is pretty lean. That is 8 to 10% lower than what the cost of services is in Keene or in Greenfield, which is our main competitors for staffing. That's where our firefighters go. They go to Greenfield if they can get a better deal there. So that's where a lot of our considerations go into, like union negotiations, which is again our biggest cost. So the question for the town meeting is $2,080 per person for municipal services in Brattleboro acceptable to you, or do you want it lower? Do you want it even lower than do you want to say, look, even though Keene spends $2,300 for municipal services, we spend $2,080. We think that Brattleboro can't afford $2,080. We want it to be something less. Those are the types of things that you could set as a goal and then look at our whole scope of services. We provide about 250 services to the town, and that ranges from a 56-hour-a-week library to a maintaining 90 miles of roads, 35 miles of sidewalks, all the things that, like, we don't really always think about a lot of things that the town provides. They aren't like front of mind, but if you started to reduce those services, people would notice it. You would unfortunately, I think, start to say, well, oh, how come it took 25 minutes for the fire department to show up rather than 5 minutes? Like, why is that all of a sudden? Or you might start asking, how come the road didn't get plowed for 2 days after the storm? Things like that. And that would be kind of where you'd have to weigh, do you want to take a chainsaw to what the town does, or do you want to think it through, rationally, reasonably, in an ordered manner to determine, well, yeah, actually, no, maybe we don't need a pool, or we don't need, some of the services that we're providing. So that's sort of just my thinking on that. I don't know if it's helpful, but
Thanks, John.
That sort of, yeah.
Other questions?
That wasn't an answer. That was not an answer.
Frick, that is not how we're going to speak to each other in this meeting.
Thank you, but
Kate.
I would like my question answered.
Quite honestly, it was a little hard for me to decipher what the question was in the question. So what I heard was there multi-year planning? And I actually think that we've just answered that question. Kate, no. Frick, I'm going to move on.
Okay.
I'm going to move on. Thank you.
Kate O'Connor. I was going to say Brattleboro, but that's obvious. I'm thinking what might be really helpful for all of us is to really understand what the cuts are. So I'm wondering, for town meeting, could we have some kind of pie chart that says, because as we know about 66% of our town budget is personnel, and the other 34 is basically everything else. So I'm wondering if we could have a pie chart that takes these 41 or 50, whatever it is, things, breaks them down and said, these are personnel expenses, these are other, and do it like the chart, and I'm talking about like the chart that is already on the town website. Use those categories, which is personnel, everything else. And if we could go through, because a lot of these things that are called cuts aren't really cuts. They're using special funds, whether it's if you look right through the finance report, the special funds, the revolving loan fund. Could we find out actually what expenses that we're paying, what things that you folks are counting as reductions aren't really reductions? We're using other money to pay for those. And I also think, what are we putting over, moving to taxpayers paying for? Like we just heard, there's a discussion about still making us all pay for pay-as-you-throw bags, and it's over $300,000. And the original plan, when the trash came out, we weren't going to pay for bags anymore. And then when you needed money, you've now going to charge yourself $300,000. So basically, I'm wondering if we could get some kind of breakdown so we're all really understanding what is that actual cut, what is using money from another fund, what is passing the cost on to taxpayers. That would, I think, would be, at least to me, really helpful. And as somebody who went to all the select board meetings and listened to the budget discussions, I ended up having to put this all big pie charts. I have pie charts, I have graphs, I have everything. But I think it'd be helpful if you folks did it so that we really, really understand what this big long list actually is and accomplishes. The ideal world, and I know you're not going to do this, would be for you folks to go through this list and tell us which is, and again, because what we just talked about, you're not going to do it, but to say this is a cut for or reduction for FY26, we know it's coming back in FY27. And I know you're not going to want to do that, but I'm just saying in the Disney world, if we could have our wildest dreams, it would be nice to know what we're going to be funding in FY27 that we're taking out in FY26. So I know I've just asked for a lot of stuff, but it would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks. John?
Yeah, so what I heard was to do some sort of categorization of those reductions that the select board approved, and we can try to do that the best that we can. I do know that of those 41 items, 30, I believe 32 of them would show up in fiscal 27 base budget. So if the next select board could opt to increase back up to the level that it was reduced from or not. So about 78% of those items will show up in the next budget. So it is a reduction in the future budgets, unless the select board wants to restore.
Thank you. Gary?
Is this okay? It is on. Gary Stroud, District 8 Chair. Along with that, what Kate was saying, I was just also mentioning too, watching on the news with, in which you were mentioning about the old chainsaw, what's going on in Washington. Now we factor that in, and the tariffs with this as well too, with the price of increase. So I'd like to have a side-by-side comparison of any type of increases with the tariffs that's going to be happening, because this is going to change a lot on this as well too, with the cost and increases on that. So I was just wondering if we can get numbers for that alongside with what Kate was saying also, because there's a lot of cuts. There's a lot of
just check the
increases.
New York Times and see what's actually happening right now. So like, I think, Gary, that what you're talking about is such a fluid situation.
Yeah.
That it would be not possible right now, and certainly not possible next Saturday,
Right.
to account for and to predict the future on what may or may not happen.
Right.
You know, this administration is sowing chaos, and I don't think John and Patrick are going to be able to kind of get a handle on that by
Right.
next week.
Well, it's just something to factor in along.
I think as actual things happen, rather than just talk of things, we will have something to say on it. Until such a time, we're all sitting in the same chaos.
Yeah.
There is a task force at work at the state level. They are having a meeting on Saturday. The Treasurer, Mike Pichek, is leading that up. And, folks can attend. I think it's 9:30 at BAMS.
Great, thank you.
Peter?
That's important.
But to your point, I do think it's something that we need to keep in focus. But as Daniel pointed out, trying to pin it down to a number is it's going to be really difficult. But yeah, I think it's something that we do need to pay attention to.
Thanks. Martin?
Okay, so budget is my weakest topic, but I'm trying to understand. So I have some questions about some things that my question might be a little stumbly, so I hope maybe you can help me.
My answer might be stumbly too,
Yeah.
so let's go ahead.
Okay, so when we have unfilled staff positions in the budget that are not filled, where does that money go at the end of that budget year?
Great question. So John, you want to speak?
Okay. Yeah. So if there is money budgeted for a vacancy that is not used, that money would typically go to unassigned fund balance at the end of the year. That's where it would show up.
Is there a way, I know probably not tonight, but before the meeting, that you could tell us for like the last 5 years, how much money that was unfilled staff positions has gone to into the unassigned fund balance?
We can try. That may be difficult to extract for going the past 5 years.
Yeah, or
it
at
would
least
take a long time.
Or
to
at
get
least
that.
what the salary level is of the unfilled positions at the end of the budget year.
Okay.
Just because I know that we've been taxing for positions that have gone unfilled, and in the budget it says that it's supposed to go to that thing, and then it goes into kind of like a big other money pile that's not what it was allocated for, right?
Yeah. I will say that, so in previous years, we did have quite a bit of vacancy savings that went to unassigned fund balance. Last fiscal year, we hardly had any. It was basically the positions were filled, or those funds were used for overtime or other staff expenses.
Yeah, and I mean, I do mean just like so if they went into overtime, that would be different than an unassigned fund balance. Is there any way like you could get us at least rough information for the last like 5 years before our next meeting, so we can look at how, like, one of the things this is going back to 2 or 3 years ago, I think, is like we had unfilled positions and then it goes into the fund balance. So we're taxing people for money for one purpose and then it goes to another, and it kind of feels like that's a lot of money because staff positions are expensive with, I don't know, outfitting an office or health insurance, the cost over and above what the actual salary is the cost per employee is what I'm looking at. Like if the cost per employee was used for things that weren't approved in the budget, that's kind of what I'm looking for like about 5 years.
Okay.
And my follow-up question to that is, this is where I'm going with it, is there a mechanism that we could use at town meeting to say if these positions are unfilled, they don't go to any other use, they're held in escrow for next year for that? I'm assuming if we don't fill a position, that position will still be open and we'll still want to hire for it. Is there a way to hold that?
Looking for guidance from the town attorney. I also see the assistant town manager has his hand raised.
If you want to go first.
Do you want to go first, Patrick? You seem very confident.
He has his own mic.
I wouldn't say that. So here's the thing. I think I heard the question, and I suspect tomorrow that question's going to get handed to me. And I gotta be perfectly honest with you. I have no earthly idea how to answer it, and I want to put that answer right there in a little bit of context. The general fund functions as a whole. There are revenues, there are expenses, and there's the balance at the end of the year. In the time that I've worked for the town, which is now about 14 years, up until last year, we could almost always rely on the police department being understaffed. And corresponding to that, you would notice that for that same period of time, there was often a good deal of excess unassigned fund balance that would get injected into the next year's budget. I would say, to the chief's credit, Chief Hardy, she's done an amazing job of pumping some new energy into that department. And really, the Brattleboro Police Department is now today a place where, young officers want to go. And so those positions are today being filled, and one of the consequences of that is that we're not having years where at the end of the year, the town manager's office is trying to figure out how do we explain to everybody why we have a $700,000 surplus. So things have changed, and the surpluses now are, let's say, more rare, but we've got, 27 or 30 officers on the street, and that's necessary at this time. So you ask about the last 5 years, and I think there were certainly vacancies. Some vacancies would have been all 12 months. Some vacancies might be a month, right? Somebody left and then a month later somebody got hired and so got filled again. Trying to figure out exactly how many, let's say, months or payrolls of vacancy occurred over 5 years across all departments. And then if you could put a number to that, it wouldn't necessarily match the number in the whatever you call it, the balance of the budget, because while there may have been savings in staff, there could have been excessive expenses somewhere else. So I'm just sort of struggling to figure out
I
how
can
to
clarify.
answer.
I can clarify. So like, if it's spent on, overtime and stuff, that's still staff costs. That's what it was approved for. My concern is that historically we have approved things and then money approved for one purpose ends up in the general, what is it called? Unassigned fund balance, which ends up to be kind of like a slush fund, like you can use it for anything. So it's only so really all I'm wondering about is staffing budget that's not used at all for staffing. That goes into the unassigned fund balance. That's because somebody was trying to talk to me about this and just basically said, like, I don't know, what I'm trying to learn about is how money gets put in there that is assigned for some other use.
Okay.
So like if it was used on overtime or, there's been staffing stuff, like that's not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is just like funds allocated for departments that end up in the big pool.
The town attorney would like to speak to it.
Can I please just say one thing? Yeah, thank you. There is no point in time in where we say there's a vacancy in this position, and so let's use that funds to, pay overtime or pay the electric bill or pay, some other thing. It's literally just the budget is in essence one number. It's the bottom line number, and so there isn't a slush fund. There isn't a decision, this position's not filled, so then we'll use it to, pave the road. It literally is just an unspent thing in the budget that gets balanced out by all the other line items, some of which are going to be too high, some of which are going to be too low. And so it sort of all comes out in the wash. And if there's a surplus at the end of the year, or we do better than planned, it becomes part of the unassigned fund balance. And if it's in excess of the guideline, we bring it back to town meeting for you to assign it to some other purpose.
Thanks, Patrick. Bob, do you want to speak?
And Patrick went to that, in that the budget is a number. It's at the end of the day, when you're voting on the budget, it is a number that you're voting on, okay? And that number can be moved and amended to be, increased, decreased, but it's a number. But the general fund doesn't roll over into the next year. So that becomes an unassigned fund balance, and only the electorate, or in Brattleboro's case, representative town meeting, can actually appropriate that fund balance. There are a couple of exceptions to that with regard to what are called reserve funds. And if you set up a reserve fund, like many towns, a new fire truck is, $800,000. You can set up a reserve fund, put X number of dollars toward it every year. That fund keeps going until, once every 10 years you buy a truck. So there are certain exceptions, and we have a whole capital reserve fund that outlines going out 20 years what those expenditures are. So there are some that do roll over, but the general fund does not. So to your question as to can we just allocate certain things to roll to the next year, unfortunately the answer in the general fund is no on that.
Thanks, Bob. It's a really great question. I really appreciate the time you took to explain that as well, Patrick. Thank you. Franz, did you want to say something?
No, it's been covered.
Okay. David?
Okay, I'm going to try and play Jeopardy and phrase this in the form of a question. Is it not the case that the RTM will vote on a total budget number, but for better or worse, there are no restrictions on town administration, with the advice and consent of the select board, to transfer monies from one line to another.
That's correct.
Bob?
Essentially correct. Yeah.
Could you rephrase it in like layperson's terms? Yeah. No, I'm not asking that. I'm saying like, can everyone in this room understand
what you're
what
getting
that's
at is whether or not there is an actual line item veto. And so the short answer is no. And historically, the way Brattleboro has always done its motions is for a lump sum figure. Now that figure may be by the administration changed, modified, certain things get more spending during the year, but that total amount is the budget within which the select board, absent emergencies and unexpected things happening, operates the town for that year. So when we have amendments at town meeting, and you may say, I don't like some certain service, and you move to reduce the budget by a certain amount, you may say why. And then the select board, in carrying out the budget during that year, they run, 3 of them at least every year, run the risk of, if they take enough decisions that are against what the wishes are at town meeting, they run the risk of not being reelected. That's the check and balance on that ultimate figure.
Thanks, Bob. Okay, other questions about the budget? I think George has been waiting a little while.
Thank you, Patrick. You're talking about
Would you just
vacancies.
introduce yourself?
George Carville, District 7. Talking about vacancies in the police department, and it's good that we're getting those filled. But that made me think, what are the total, as we sit here tonight, how many vacant slots are there townwide right now?
I would interrogate Sally Nix if she knows that number off the top of her
Or an estimate?
Yep.
Could we just get a microphone to Sally? Thank you.
This is a memory game. The fire department, actually, we're just about full there. Oh, geez. The IT position is vacant. So there's a couple things changing there, but would be finance director, fire chief, and then one in the police, the fire department. We got assessor's tech is coming up too. Yeah, so it varies. Most of them are full, really.
Yeah.
Or they're filling up. So it would be the IT one.
Thanks,
Assistant town manager, yeah, that's coming up too.
Select board member?
Well,
No,
those
that's
are
not
new.
vacant anymore.
So 4 to 5.
Where I was going with that was, a hiring freeze wouldn't really solve any problem right now. We don't have that anymore.
No.
Okay, other questions on Article 12? Rachel, I know, it just takes a minute sometimes.
Rachel Dissler, District 9. My question might be answered in the book, and I maybe just have not gotten to that part yet. But I think part of the reason we're all sort of chewing over the budget as we are is that if I understood what I read correctly, pretty much 100% of the funds, or the bulk of the funds raised that pay for town services and whatnot, are raised through property tax. Is that correct?
No. But no, I get what you're saying. A lot of the funds that are used to, pay for the services are property taxes, but not 100%. It's actually 78.8% in this particular budget.
Okay. Again, it might be spelled out in the book, and I haven't gotten there yet, but I think it would be helpful to see what other levers the town has available to pull to raise funds. What other mechanisms are available when we are looking at a 12% tax increase and thinking about how that impacts people's lives and the distress that creates for many people, and why that feels so shocking. To be able to see what other mechanisms we can lean on would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Liz?
I just wanted to mention, Rachel, that percentage of did you say 78%?
Yeah.
Has gone way down due to the 1% tax and the rooms and meal tax. They've been a real boon to reducing the dependence on property taxes.
Okay. John, do you want to add to it?
Yeah, and the EMS revenue also brought it down slightly.
Okay, thank you. I think Sonia was
Kathy.
next, and then Kathy.
Sonia Silbert, District 9. Whatever happened, and maybe this is a question for over here, didn't the library get a very large grant with the ARPA funds? And is either the income or the expenses shown in here? Because it looks like there's some library cuts, but also isn't there going to be a big investment?
Okay, question about library funding. Star?
Thanks for asking, Sonia. So those are all federal funds. They are targeted only for this capital project. It is a reimbursement grant. There's no match. So we will be able to pay for any of the improvements that we do from those grant funds, but they're not indicated in this budget.
Thank you. Other questions? I think Kathy was next.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And there are other things that the town does that are not in this general fund budget. We also have a utility fund and a parking fund, and that raises money to spend in those areas. I think Kathy was next.
Thanks, Kathy, for District 9. I wonder if it's possible. I feel like when I'm looking at the general fund budget summary, expenses, and revenue report, in my estimation, it might be more useful to actually ditch the actual from 3 years ago and put an actual to date for the current fiscal year. I would love to have an actual to date for FY25, even if that's 6 months, or by the time we actually get to town meeting, we're pretty much 3/4 of the year. So I would love to have that included. It feels hard to me to compare a budget for the coming year to a budget from last year with no actual information.
John?
Yeah, so that information is published in the Selectboard packets. So I think the last quarterly financial update was in February. And so if you look, we can link to that in the answers to these questions that we send around. So yeah, that information does exist.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Alex? At the back.
Thank you. No, you're great. Just clarifying question on taxes. When we're talking about the raising property taxes, that is before any state subsidy or like abatement, I don't know what the technical words are, but support for folks. So there is sort of like a proportional
rebate. Like a progressive taxation.
A progressive, thank you. So like when we're talking about 17% across the board, it's actually not going to be a straight, or whatever the number is, it's not going to necessarily fall that way in tangible dollars on people's taxes.
I would say that is correct, and it's pretty nuanced. But yeah, it's a 12.1% increase to the amount of property taxes that we need to raise. But it will be felt differently by different households based on their taxable income and assessed value.
Thank you. And to follow up on Kathy's phrasing of, I didn't find this yet in the book, but it might be in there, is the like sort of this per 100,000 in the budget equals X dollars per of your property. What is that number? That often we're like, hey, can you calculate this right now during town meetings? So curious if A, we have that now, or B, can be calculated before that day.
Yeah, maybe John wants to kind of work on that. I do actually have it in a memo from early January, but I don't know if it's going to be accurate today. Do you want to speak about something?
I did. Alex, I really appreciate your question because the Homestead Rebate Act is something that is severely underutilized by the people who need it. And we see on the Board of Adjustment and so forth, how many people's tax problems would be solved if they had only knew and understood and filed for the Homestead Rebate Act. And so in our select board meeting a month or so ago, we have a new communications plan to try and reach people to understand and file for the homestead rebate because it's so important, especially this year.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz.
And as many people as you can tell to file for the Homestead Rebate Act, the better.
Yeah. John's got some information on the per 100,000.
Yeah, so the estimate of this budget and the assumptions around this estimate are that the grand list stays the same. It won't. It'll change. But it is $1,628 per 100,000 of assessed value, which is also equivalent to a tax bill of $2,981 for the median assessed property value of $183,100. So that's what we're talking about. I think in the memo that we did for the select board in January, that's all broken out by individual item in the budget too. So if you want to see how it breaks out, we can provide a link to that in the answers to these questions that we sent around. So,
thank you. Who is next? Gemma, and then Christine.
I mean, if there was nobody else.
No, you're good. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Hugh. The microphone's over here, so we'll just go over here and then we'll come to you right away. Or Patrick can just get his steps in. Okay, go right ahead. Hugh, and then Gemma, and then Christine. The only line is related to my memory. So.
Hugh Barber, District 9. I just have an observation. The median house taxes are going to go up $321 a year. That's in the booklet. But that's just one component of the increases. We're all hit with increased water and sewer, insurances, groceries, and a million other things. And it's just making the town more. I understand why the budget went up. It's primarily police and fire hires, but it's just making things more unaffordable. And it's tougher on the people on fixed incomes, like we have a lot of people on fixed incomes in our building. So I just don't know where the heck we go with all this. And maybe it's down the road, it's a scope of services that maybe we don't need to provide all the services that we provide right now. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, thanks, Hugh. And that's absolutely a question that this meeting will consider and the select board will consider over the next year. I do want to just push back about this idea that we are doing this on the backs of people with low fixed incomes. As somebody that works with that demographic, I can tell you that provided that they file their taxes, by and large, there's a great deal of tax relief that the state offers on both the municipal and education tax. And so the actual real taxation level for low-income folks in our community is far lower than it would be for people who don't have those rebates. Gemma?
Just really quickly, Gemma Seymour, District 8 again. I'm wondering why the information for the other funds is not in this booklet and where that information can be found. I'm particularly concerned about the parking fund because the parking system has become very controversial lately in this town. And we have a single line item here, transfer parking fund, $54,000. I see nothing in here about expenses related to parking enforcement or anything else, and I want to learn more about that.
Okay. I can try and give my layperson's answer to it. So this is the general fund budget. And I'm guessing, Bob, there's probably some legal reason why the voters of the town need to approve the general fund budget. The select board approved a parking budget and a utility budget earlier in the year. why did the voters not approve those budgets?
It's because the general fund is taxpayer dollars, and that's why it's voted on by the representatives here.
And so to find those items, they're on the town website in the relevant sections, parking and utilities. Yeah, and you will take that up in like, what, April, May, June kind of
In the
time?
spring.
Yeah. And absolutely heard on the parking, very controversial, hard decision, you know, and hopefully we'll calibrate it right. Christine?
Christine Hazard, District 8. I'm just wondering, is there, in the general fund, do we allocate money for emergency events, or is that in a different fund? And if it is in the general fund, is there a line item for that, of how much money we put aside in case of, you know, flooding or something like that?
We don't allocate money directly for an emergency. That would be, again, something that we would go to unassigned general fund. So that's why we keep a reserve is for an emergency, although we also have some additional funding elsewhere that could be used in a pinch, but it's typically would be the unassigned general fund balance.
Which is why there's been a kind of like attempt at keeping that at a certain level.
Yeah, which it's a risk management calculation, how much to have in that reserve, so.
Kevin, I'm guessing you have a question.
I do.
Right.
I came up to the mic. Kevin O'Brien, District 9. Kind of a continuation, a question about the parking. Does the town pay for the enforcement of the parking? And wouldn't that be a budget line item out of the general fund?
It's kind of out of the parking fund. Doesn't the parking fund the parking staff?
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah.
That was part of why I was asking.
Yeah.
I wasn't
Yeah.
sure about that.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Where's the person?
Yeah, in the parking fund. Okay, Christina?
Quick question. You mentioned the income levels. Well, you didn't mention, but I just want to know if you do you know that if it's $47,000 for a household? I just looked this up, and you get a tax break from the education taxes if your household income is higher, but for the municipality taxes, is it true that if the income in your entire household is all added up, which it has to be, that if that is over $47,000, you won't get any tax credit for the municipality taxes?
I believe that's generally accurate. There's probably more nuance to it. In the memo from January 7th, which maybe we should kind of publish this in advance of town meeting, Patrick worked up a nice little table that shows kind of like the gradations of income with the assessed value at the top. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a cutoff, unfortunately, you know, like a lot of programs like this, the worst place to be is just over the other side of that, you know. But generally speaking, you know, I work for the anti-poverty agency in our town, and we serve, you know, thousands of people every year. And there are many, 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 many people in this town who are single individuals living on Social Security of around about $1,000 a month. And as far as those people are concerned, provided that they file their taxes and, you know, do the homestead declaration, their tax impact is, as a proportion of their income, it still might be kind of more burdensome than mine, for example. Like, I pay about 5% of my total income to the town, to the state in taxes. And for somebody with, say, $1,000 a month, it might be more like, say, 10%, but even so, it's still far less in dollar value than the total tax bill that they would receive. Kate? John, you want to add to
Well, just, so that is a state program, and the levels and the amounts are determined by the state legislature, so those are the folks to talk to about, like, how those might change or not, so.
Yeah. Kate?
Kate O'Connor. I want to do it just, this might help, it's a little commercial. The Wyndham Southeast School District had their info meeting last night, and they put together a really good document, their equivalent of the Finance Committee, talking about the income sensitivity program. If I can find the chart, I'll send it to you folks. And it's actually really interesting because your income that you can qualify for has gone down, so less people can qualify. And it's actually the middle income people that are the ones that are squeezed the most now. So I think we have to remember that. I found that chart really, really interesting, that it's the middle income people that are the ones that are going to be squeezed most by the property taxes. But I will get you the link because it's a really helpful thing to look at.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I agree. The burden would be borne most by those in the middle, absolutely. Other questions on the budget? And I want to note that it's like 9:35. We've been going now for 2.5 hours. We usually take a break, but we're just going to keep plowing on. We've got about 5 more articles to consider, but 4 of them are very boilerplate. Okay, now that I've discouraged you from asking questions, we'll move on, I guess. That wasn't my intention. I just, these seats are not super comfortable. Okay, next one. So we're going to flip all the way back to page 15. Actually, no, we managed to get to page 16. Great. All right, Article 13. Get ready to have lots of conversation. To see if the town will advise the select board to include a specific amount of the FY20s. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. To see if the town will advise the select board to include a specific amount of the FY27 budget to be allocated to human services funding. So how much are we going to allocate to human services funding in the next budget? So the question for this budget was already decided at last town meeting. That's why we got 461, whatever. And so the meeting now will decide on a figure. And we usually start that with an opening bid of 1.4% of the previous year's general fund budget. And then we have a bidding war to see who will win. Questions? Seeing none, moving on. Okay, Article 14, I guess I don't know anything. To elect 2 representatives to the Capital Grant Review Board for a term of 1 year, members to be nominated from the floor. So this is a sort of committee. People can be nominated to be on it. I don't believe that committee has been super active. No? Okay. Any questions about that? Article 15, to see if the town will elect or appoint members to the Town Finance Committee for a term of 1 year, members to be nominated from the floor. So the committee that brought you this report will need to be reformed, and those members will be elected from the town meeting. Questions about that? Okay. Article 16, to see if the town will elect or appoint members to the Human Services Review Committee for a term of 1 year, members to be nominated from the floor. So David kind of spoke about this earlier. His committee worked together to arrive at allocations for human service funding requests. We'll need to reform that committee. Questions about that? Okay. Article 17, to elect 3 trustees for the Brooks Memorial Library to serve 3 years and 1 trustee to fill 1-year expired terms. There are names for consideration already for the 3-year term: Nikki Holland, Joyce Sullivan, and Virilli. And the 1-year term will be nominated from the floor. Questions about that? Okay. Article 18 is where we can talk about whatever we want to talk about. To transact any other business that may lawfully come before the meeting. So that is the other business part of the meeting. Questions about that? Bets on how long it will take. Yeah, longer than maybe it should. And that will be the end of our meeting. And so if we manage to do that on Saturday before 5 p.m., then we all get to go home. If we don't get to that point by 5 p.m., then the meeting needs to decide whether it wants to stay or come back the next day. Doesn't want to do that, surely. And so we'll see what happens. I want to thank you all for your patience and your good questions and your lack of advocacy and debate. Thank you for following and more Odell's expectations for the most part. And I think at this point we'll move to adjourn. I don't think we even really convened. It's done. It's done. This meeting is over. See you soon.